The MCU just doesn't stop growing. Like, one universe wasn't enough to fit all these amazing characters, so Phase 4 is now all about the expanding multiverse. I mean, sure, we've all come to love and care for the current roster of MCU stars, but just think of all the new characters that we're going to see over the next few years. And hey, you're in luck because that's what today's video is all about. I'm going to break down all the uber powerful characters, both good and bad, who have yet to arrive in the MCU. Just how powerful are they? And just what would they do if they were in the MCU? Let's get into it right now. The first character we have to talk about is Adam Warlock. Not just because Adam is an all-time great Marvel character, but because we know for certain now he's showing up in the MCU sooner rather than later. After being teased 4 years ago at the end of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, we're now finally getting Adam Warlock in the MCU. But just, in 2023 when the third movie comes out. Man, that's still so long to wait. Anyway, Adam Warlock is perfect. And no, I'm not exaggerating here. The character in the comics was created as the perfect being, and although the backstory is going to be slightly different in the MCU, they do seem to be keeping the essence of the character intact, with making the Sovereign and the Golden High Priestess Aisha making what they claim to be the perfect specimen before cutting to black. Now, the casting of this character was a hotly debated point of contention as soon as that second movie came out, but did anyone really expect them to cast the goofy kid who raps in We're the Millers as Adam Warlock? Don't get me wrong, Will Poulter has grown into a really fine actor now, but if you cast him as Adam 4 years ago when he was teased, then I think the internet would have exploded. But now the huge question is, how exactly will Adam fit into the MCU? Normally he's insanely powerful, but his arc and character are generally closely tied with the Infinity Stones. In the comic arc that Infinity War is based off of, Adam is a central character in the battle against Thanos, and many people thought that when Adam's pod was teased, it meant they were setting him up for Infinity War. But now the stones are completely gone in this universe, so what exactly will Adam Warlock be up to? Well, if I was a betting man, I'd wager that while Adam will be a character in Guardians of the Galaxy 3, I bet the villain will be the Magus, which is an evil future version of Adam. I could see James Gunn presenting his own twisted take on the Adam and the Magus relationship, while also exploring the Guardians' attempts to remind the new version of Gamora about her earlier life. It would make a nice thematic parallel, no? And I hope they don't nerf Adam's powers in the third movie, but then again, they kind of have to because there's no Infinity Stones, right? Sure, he's going to be insanely powerful and probably have a whole host of powers and abilities, but he probably won't reach the same potential as he does in the comics. Okay guys, for real, Mephisto is coming to the MCU soon. Sure, we all thought he was the main villain in WandaVision, but it was Agatha all along. We then thought he was being teased in the Loki show, but that didn't pan out. And then the MCU just is outright trolling us by releasing the Spider-Man No Way Home trailer that includes an impossible-to-miss poster hinting at a devil in disguise, which is a cheeky reference to the fact that in the comics, Mephisto is responsible for erasing everyone's memory of Spider-Man, not Doctor Strange. With all these teases, it's only a matter of time, right? Well, what makes Mephisto so powerful in the first place? Well, he's an extra-dimensional demon who runs his own pocket dimension that he calls Hades. It's not a pleasant place to be. His main goal is usually enslaving human souls and making sentient beings bow to him. Classic bad guy stuff. In the comics, he's been around for thousands and thousands of years and is shown to be powered by the sources of evil in the human world, which means every time you don't put your cart back after grocery shopping, or when you make a turn without using your turn signal, you're just making Mephisto more powerful. So how could this Class 2 demon fit into the ongoing narrative? Well, if Nightmare isn't the villain for the upcoming Doctor Strange sequel, then Mephisto can totally fill those shoes. Imagine a situation where Wanda, in her quest to find her kids throughout the multiverse, learns that after they were erased in our universe, they were sent to Mephisto's dimension and are now trapped there, forcing Wanda to team up with the cautious Strange in order to rescue them. Boom, the movie writes itself. I think we as fans are always looking at what comes next. Right when Thanos was defeated, the conversation became who would be the next big bad that the Avengers would have to face off against, and who could hold a candle to the Mad Titan. Well, although Kang the Conqueror is off to a great start when it comes to establishing a new big bad, I don't think there's a villain who's been more discussed or theorized as Galactus. Everyone wants to see the giant purple planet eater on screen again after a truly disappointing Space Cloud-esque reveal in that one one terrible Fantastic Four film. No, not that terrible Fantastic Four film, the other terrible Fantastic Four film. Man, is it that hard to make a Fantastic Four film? Anyway, Galactus is one of the most powerful characters in the entire galaxy and is considered an omnipotent entity and possesses the power cosmic, which is a vast source of godly cosmic energy. To put it simply, I don't think throwing a shield, shooting an arrow, or shrinking down to sneak into his body and then expand is going to have much of an effect on Galactus. And you just kinda gotta hope he doesn't want to eat your planet. So how could the MCU integrate Galactus? Well, I think there's two ways. The first way is to make him the most powerful Celestial. Now, Galactus isn't really a Celestial in the comics, but the MCU has been known to alter comic storylines in order to fit in with the MCU narrative. And the Celestials have been on the fringes of the MCU for a bit now, and look to have a major impact on the upcoming Eternals story. So it would be easy to have Galactus be the top dog Celestial. Or if you wanted to tie in the multiverse a bit, in the comics, Galactus was originally a humanoid creature by the name of Galon, who was the only survivor of the 6th incarnation of the multiverse. There's a way to tweak and alter that backstory just a bit to explain that Kang the Conqueror's goal to dominate the multiverse somehow leads to the creation of Galactus. No matter how they do it, I know we all just want Galactus in the MCU, even if that means a major headache for our heroes. Alright, if I told you the Beyonder was once considered the most powerful being in the multiverse, would that mean anything to you? I mean, there was a time in Marvel Comics where they kept introducing new threats and characters who all were heralded as the most powerful being in the multiverse, so it kind of lost its luster after a while. But I mean, the Beyonder could legitimately make the case for why he's the most powerful. The Beyonder has a fascinating backstory. He was a member of an ancient, otherworldly race known as the Beyonders and was brought to our universe through a complicated and comic booky method. And then the Beyonder started to watch Earth, presumably because he forgot his Netflix password, and he found something that confused him. In his own universe, the Beyonder understood everything about reality itself, but in our universe, he really did not comprehend the whole free will thing that humans seem super passionate about and wanted to understand more. Power-wise, the Beyonder can manipulate reality and cause multiversal-wide destruction if he really wanted to. So how do you bring the Beyonder to the MCU? Well, again, I have two solid options. One is a straight-up adaptation of Secret Wars, which saw the Beyonder transport a bunch of heroes and villains to a newly created planet called Battleworld to fight it out. You know, they could adapt it so it's basically like a Squid Game but with superheroes and villains. Wouldn't that be a neat one-off Avenger movie? Or if you really wanted to get a little crazy, here's my other pitch. Make the Beyonder the big bad for What If Season 2. As much as I wanted What If to be an anthology series, it's clear that the first story is a season-long interconnected story, so I see no reason why that would be different in Season 2. Introducing the Beyonder as like a rival to the Watcher, who wants to watch as well, but also slowly manipulate events to make it more entertaining, would all lead to an incredible showdown between the Beyonder and the Watcher. Come on, admit it, that sounds pretty cool, right? I've been naming a lot of villains on this list, so I think it's time to mention another good guy. Well, kind of. Sort of? It's complicated. I'm talking about the Sentry, who's a character Marvel fans have been eagerly awaiting to show up in some capacity in the MCU. To put it simply, the Sentry is sorta like Marvel's version of Superman. He's powered by the Golden Sentry Serum, which allows him to be fueled by the sun itself, like Supes, and has the standard super strength, super speed, invulnerability, etc. But I think it's safe to say that the Sentry is a much more complicated character than Superman. I'm not saying Superman isn't complicated, but the Sentry? Big woof. Let me explain. It all starts with the Super Soldier Serum. Everyone wanted to make their own version of it after Captain America, and that led to Canada's Department K giving it a try to not only recreate it, but make it insanely more powerful. Of course, it was unstable, which meant it probably wasn't the best thing for human trials. But one night, a meth addict by the name of Robert Reynolds broke into the lab, found the compound, consumed it, and then gained the power of 1,000,000 exploding suns. Don't you just hate it when that happens? In the early days, he acted as a mentor to Spider-Man, an ally to the X-Men, and a friend to the much-hated outcast, the Hulk. So what went wrong? Well, the emergence of a shadowy monster called the Void. The Void was as equal of a villain as the Sentry was a hero. This is because the Void was actually Reynolds' own repressed persona and was powered by the Sentry's powers. So while the Sentry was out doing heroics, this meant the Void was out there doing evil deeds. This led to Sentry, Reed Richards, and Doctor Strange inventing a system that made the whole world forget about the Sentry and even wiped Reynolds' memory. The Sentry is an overall fascinating character who would be amazing to see in live action. I could see that character show up in Captain Marvel's sequel. She needs a new foe who can put up a good fight, and the Sentry definitely fits the bill. Okay, this is it. The truly most powerful entity in the entire Marvel Universe. I know a lot of characters can make that claim, and there's a lot of really powerful individuals, but really, the one above all is the very top dog. The one above all is God of the Marvel Multiverse. He's the creator of everything and everyone, plain and simple. He's only appeared a few times in the comics, but it's important to mention what is probably his most famous moment. When the Fantastic Four were off searching a heaven-like realm looking for the things soul, it's a long story, they came to a door, and through it was just a normal living room where the one above all sat sketching comic panels and had characters on a drawing board. Appearance-wise, he looked a lot like Jack Kirby, the legendary comic creator responsible for a lot of your favorite Marvel characters. There's just no way to do this exact scene in the MCU, but, and I say this with a big but, there is technically a way this could work now. Say whenever Deadpool makes it over to the MCU, he realizes he's in an MCU movie and then promptly is able to break out to the real world. In that scenario, they could reveal the one above all to be Kevin Feige. Now, is that a little tasteless to Jack Kirby's legacy? Probably, since there's already a slightly contentious relationship between some comic writers and Disney, but all I'm saying is there's a way to make it work. How do you top God? Well, you really can't, so I wanted to bring up another character who's not as powerful as some of the others on this list, but is still both insanely strong and deserves to be in an MCU movie ASAP. I'm of course talking about Beta Ray Bill, who I think besides maybe Galactus is the character fans want to actually see the most in the MCU. The Corbinite has been teased a few times already, with his face being carved next to all the Gladiator champions on Sakaar and the whole deal with Stormbreaker. Yeah, that's right, in the comics, Stormbreaker was actually first given to Beta Ray Bill, so you know he's a huge deal. On top of being similar in strength and ability to Thor, the cyborg Corbinite has a few advantages, like a transformation that helps him create a human form. At least he has that ability when he's wielding Stormbreaker. Overall, Beta Ray Bill would be a perfect new buddy to introduce in the upcoming Thor film. And when I say he's on par with Thor's strength, that's an incredible compliment, because Thor is definitely one of the strongest, most powerful Avengers. But man, what I wouldn't give to see Beta Ray Bill and Thor arm wrestle. No particular reason, I just want to see it. Since I already mentioned Thor with Beta Ray Bill, I thought I'd stay on this train and introduce another character that could have an interesting relationship with Thor, and that's Hercules. Yes, that Hercules. As we know in the MCU, it's explained that the Norse gods of old were actually based on the Asgardians, and that's why we have characters like Thor, Odin, and Loki. But are we really gonna say that the Norse gods are the only ones out there? What about the Olympian gods? Well, they exist in the Marvel Universe too. That's where Hercules comes into play. The son of Zeus, this Olympian has Hercules-level strength, which is almost unparalleled in the Marvel Universe. So how to work in Hercules? Well, I think that's where Thor comes in. It's still surprising we're getting more Chris Hemsworth Thor adventures while Tony Stark and Steve Rogers stories are firmly over. Who would have thought that? But now that Taika Waititi is handling the Thor movies, who's to say they'll stop at Thor Love and Thunder? A final movie in this new Thor trilogy could see the God of Thunder go up against other deities like the Olympians. Don't you want to see Thor interact with Hercules and even Zeus? That would be amazing. Since we're going to be getting the Fantastic Four in the MCU, I don't think it's too early to start campaigning for what comes next for Marvel's first family. And by that, I mean the introduction of Reed and Sue's son, Franklin Richards. Franklin is not only one of the most intelligent characters in Marvel Comics, but he's also a powerful reality warper. Like, for the longest time, he was assumed to be a mutant, but one storyline revealed that a young Franklin Richards ended up just altering his DNA using his insane power levels to make it look like he had the X gene, which is crazy. On top of that, there was one instance where he used his powers to help restore the multiverse after it was broken. Being able to use that power would be extremely valuable to our side when Kang the Conqueror starts breaking everything. So quick, give us that new Fantastic Four movie so we can get this process started. I'm ending with Molecule Man, who again is uber powerful, but also has one of the funniest moments in Marvel Comics history. Thanks to a pesky particle generator that hit Owen Reese with a special type of radiation, he became became Molecule Man, who's capable of transforming and manipulating the molecules of matter and energy. It's been said that he's the most powerful person in the multiverse, right under the Beyonder. I don't want to keep mentioning individuals with the power to shape and reform the multiverse, but Molecule Man is one of them. He helped immensely during Doctor Doom's version of Secret Wars, and after that was over and the multiverse was being rebuilt, it was Molecule Man who transported Miles Morales from his universe of 1610 and put Miles in the main Marvel Earth of 616. And why did he do that? Mainly because earlier, when going to see him, Miles was kind to Molecule Man and gave him a weeks-old cheeseburger he had in his pocket. That's what saved Miles from getting erased. Yeah, let's please see that scene in the MCU. The MCU continues to give us amazing villain after amazing villain, and it set a high bar for whoever decides to show up and cause chaos for our heroes next. But what are some powerful MCU villains we haven't seen yet? Sure, this list is going to mention the big ones like Doctor Doom and Galactus, but stick around and I'll throw in some other insanely strong and interesting villains that I think need a live-action introduction. I'll be breaking down where we could see these villains pop up and what heroes they could fight. Ready? Let's get started right now. Whenever there's a list of powerful villains we all want to see in the MCU, Doctor Doom is usually at the top, and there's a reason for that. Even though he doesn't actually have a PhD, Doctor Doom is one of the most popular Marvel villains ever, and the fact that we've had 2 live-action attempts that have both completely floundered has only made us more impatient for a version of the Latvian dictator to show up in the MCU. There's just something so interesting about the guy. He's like an evil blend of both Tony Stark and Stephen Strange, which is such a dangerous combination. He's a brilliant inventor and has a genius intellect, but he also isn't afraid to dabble in the mystic arts from time to time. So we haven't seen him yet in the MCU, and the question becomes just where should he pop up first? The obvious answer would be in a Fantastic Four movie, since he is primarily known as being their greatest antagonist, but I just don't think that works. Probably the better option is that he's an antagonist in a Black Panther movie first, as the idea of Latveria and Wakanda at war with each other would make an excellent basis for a movie. But also, again, Doom can work anywhere. I mean, there's one storyline where he has to reluctantly team up and work with Kang the Conqueror, so imagine if the MCU goes that route.
Trespassing on Latvian soil.
Galactus is the very definition of power. Anyone who can put eats planets on a resume definitely should not be underestimated. And we haven't seen Galactus yet in the MCU, but arguably behind Doctor Doom, the Devourer of Worlds is someone who needs to be included in the MCU eventually. So the question I'll ask, like everyone on this list, is where should he show up? Yes, also like Doom, he's traditionally a Fantastic Four villain, but since his debut, he's morphed into an everyone threat and is one of the most important cosmic characters. Maybe the best method would be to tease him in a Fantastic Four movie and then set him up to be the big bad for everyone going forward. Not only would that create some awesome stories, but it would also position the new Fantastic Four as vital to this next big phase, which is great for us in the long run. The question is, do you think he'll keep his backstory? With the way the MCU adapts things, like making Ego the living planet a celestial, I've often thought that they'll just make Galactus another celestial for ease, but I hope not. Maybe you can introduce him in the next Eternals movie as the threat that the Celestials are all scared of?
My power is limitless.
You have to wonder what the MCU thought when the whole Mephisto backlash started in WandaVision. WandaVision was the first MCU show, so the studio got to see how audiences would react to teases and Easter eggs, and watch us all work each other up in a frenzy with our wild theories.
Boner.
There's no way they could have predicted the internet would be so adamant that Mephisto was going to show up, right? But I mean, it's their fault there were so many teases. But the fact that Marvel's Devil did not end up making an appearance has now created the running joke about how Mephisto is going to show up everywhere. But what's going to happen when he actually does? The funniest thing ever would be if he shows up in a completely random place we never expect. Like, what if he randomly shows up in Miss Marvel? Our jaws would drop. The great thing about Mephisto is that he can work in just about any MCU movie, as he can appear to our heroes and grant them their deepest wishes at a severe cost. But if I had to pick one hero who would be most visually interesting to fight, it would have to be Doctor Strange at this point. Doctor Strange's battle with Mephisto in a later movie could open the door to more supernatural elements and pave the way for heroes like Ghost Rider. If the MCU is ever able to coax Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield back for another Spidey team-up movie, then there would need to be a solid reason for all of them to meet up again.
I hope it's okay. I just came through this,
I mean, sure, I guess you don't need a great reason, as we as an audience would probably watch any story with the three of them. Like, who needs world-ending threats when you could have a whole movie about Andrew Garfield's Peter Parker finally healing enough to marry his version of MJ, and he invites the two other Peters to be his groomsmen. Wacky wedding shenanigans would ensue. Come on, tell me you wouldn't watch that movie. Anyways, if they need an actual threat to fight, then Morlun would be the perfect one to reunite them. He's the main villain in the Spider-Verse comic series, and he jumps around different universes sucking the life force from all the spider totems. Yes, it would be a little similar to the animated Spider-Verse movies, but if it was a chance to see all three Peters hang out again, I think we would all be okay with it, right? Both can exist. That's the beauty of the multiverse. MODOK may seem like a bit of a joke because he's kind of silly with his all-head design and floating bodysuit, but he's incredibly intelligent, extremely dangerous, and could provide an excellent foil for a hero in an MCU movie. And you know what I think? I think MODOK should be a villain in Sam Wilson's Captain America 4. To me, the two would just have a fun dynamic. Sam Wilson on his own doesn't have a whole huge gallery of popular rogues, so they should bring in a fan-favorite bad guy for him to do battle with.
Yeah.
MODOK seems like the mad scientist type that would have a problem with the world around him and would go to extreme measures to change it, which does offer a parallel to Sam's character arc as the new Cap. But are there other places MODOK could pop up? I guess you could make the case that he'd be an interesting Armor Wars villain, but again, putting him up against the new Captain America would be the best choice in my opinion. And is it possible to get Patton Oswalt to voice him? Man, if you haven't seen the animated MODOK show, go do that right now. It's great.
Yeah, about that.
Whenever the X-Men make their grand introduction, they're going to need a powerful villain to fight. Yeah, sure, they could go the Magneto route again, but I'm hoping they bring in a baddie we haven't ever seen in live action, but has been teased a few times. Mr. Sinister is a master of both genetic engineering and rocking fancy capes. Two very important things in my book.
I was right.
He's a powerful villain that acts as a perfect foil for the X-Men thanks to his belief in engineering a perfect race of superhumans. We saw his name pop up over in the Fox franchise, but never got to see that pay off. But with his introduction in the MCU, he could finally make his long-awaited debut. The thing I'm wondering is whether Mr. Sinister is a one-movie type of baddie or a franchise villain. He's powerful enough where it could go either way. He's both a brainy and a brawny villain thanks to his genetic upgrades and could cause a ton of trouble for our favorite mutants. The Maestro is an evil future version of the Hulk, and I think his introduction is the exact thing the Hulk storyline in the MCU needs right now. Yes, this is the part of the video where I lament the fact that Bruce Banner and Hulk have been underutilized and mistreated in the MCU. I know, I do this a lot, but you know what would stop all my complaining? Maestro. Think of what Maestro could do for Hulk's arc in the MCU. Besides that one freakout in Age of Ultron, we haven't really gotten to showcase the destructive powers that Hulk can unleash upon the world. And with Maestro, it allows the MCU to have its cake and eat it too. By introducing a future evil version of the Hulk, we can see a version of the character unleash his true potential and showcase just how terrifying he can really be while all the heroes struggle to stop him. But do so in a way that doesn't make a villain out of our Bruce Banner and Hulk. They could even tweak it by saying Maestro comes from a different universe compared to an alternate future and have that fit in with the whole multiverse vibe the MCU is going for right now. At the end of Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, we got a classic post-credit sequel tease that hinted that the mysterious origin of the rings would be the basis for the next film. Comic fans know that the rings originally came from the McLuhans, a dragon-like alien race, and arguably the most famous McLuhan is Fin Fang Foom. Now, normally Fin Fang Foom is an Iron Man villain, but it wouldn't be hard to tweak the backstory to have the villain repurposed into a Shang-Chi antagonist. Shang-Chi is used to fighting big dragon-like creatures now, so it makes sense. The character just fits much easier into Shang-Chi's current character arc than anything to do with Iron Man. Can you imagine if Iron Man 2 had Tony fighting a big dragon alien? That would have been weird. I mean, I guess it would have been a better version of Iron Man 2 compared to the one we got though, so I guess that wouldn't be all bad. But anyways, tying a Fin Fang Foom into Shang-Chi's quest to understand the Ten Rings makes the most sense. Magus is an evil future version of Adam Warlock, a character who's set to make his debut in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. You really can't have Adam Warlock without Magus. It's a huge element in what makes the character interesting, but the real question is, just how will the franchise incorporate Magus? Will they ignore him completely? Will they build up Adam Warlock's character across multiple movies and then reveal his evil future version of himself? Or will we get Magus almost right away and he'll be the main villain of Guardians 3? It's also tough because the new version of Adam Warlock will have his backstory tweaked since he's now a creation of Aisha and the Sovereign. There's a lot of options, but really it all comes back to making Adam Warlock an important character. It was weird seeing the Infinity War arc play out without Adam at its center, as he was vital to it in the comics, but I understand why things worked out that way. Now that the Infinity Saga is complete, how could Adam and Magus shake things up in the MCU? I know this list is about powerful villains, but I still wanted to give Bullseye a special shout out. Because yes, Bullseye up against almost anyone else on this list would be a pretty one-sided fight, but he's still one of the best street-level antagonists around. He's the man that can hit anything with anything. And overall, there's a big question of whether they would bring the Netflix version of the character back after we just saw the returns of Charlie Cox's Daredevil and Vincent D'Onofrio's Kingpin. Season 3 of Daredevil had the massive cliffhanger with the character undergoing that experimental treatment to fix his shattered spine and coming out of it enhanced, so it would be weird if the MCU just dropped in a new version of the character to fight Charlie Cox's Daredevil. And the great thing about the character is that he could fight a bunch of different heroes. Yes, he's a perfect Daredevil antagonist, but he could also go up against Echo in her upcoming show, against Spider-Man if he's more street level now, Yelena if the two cross paths, or even against Moon Knight down the line.
Alright, time out!
See, Bullseye is an all-purpose villain, so let's start using him. The Lord of the Negative Zone deserves a live-action debut. Annihilus is a conqueror and a tyrant who just wants to live long enough to see Morbius 2 come out, which is code for saying he's going to be waiting a very long time. As mentioned, he rules over the Negative Zone, and he's always looking over at our normal universe with envy and hate. There's the famous comic storyline called Annihilation, which sees Annihilus cross over to our world with a whole Palpatine-level amount of warships to basically wipe out everything. It's a massive battle, and if the MCU could make an Avengers movie out of it, then that'd be pretty cool. Like, let's say Kang the Conqueror is the new Thanos-level overarching big bad for the next few phases. Well, the individual phases need to end on big villains, right? That's where Annihilus and the Annihilation storyline can come into play. It would be a way to unite both the cosmic side and the Earthbound Avengers into another huge fight. We know Blade is coming soon to the MCU, and it would be weird if we didn't see any vampires come along with him. I mean, Blade is a vampire hunter. Can't really do that if there are no vampires around. And who would be the biggest, baddest vampire you could introduce in the MCU? That's right, it's Dr. Michael Morbius at your service. Just kidding, Blade would cut off Morbius' head before Morbius could even utter the words, "But what about the Sinister Six?" I'm talking about Dracula, the most famous vampire of all time. If we're getting Blade in the MCU and he's going to have a meaningful storyline, then let's get dark and spooky by introducing Dracula for him to battle with. You don't get any more powerful than Dracula from a vampire perspective. I mean, we're getting Werewolf by Night soon, we have mummies thanks to Moon Knight, why couldn't Dracula pop up? It's the best option for Blade moving forward. But I guess there's another option too. That fake meme that's always spread around where Moon Knight calls Dracula a nerd and demands money is legendary, and although that didn't happen for real, it totally should now, so make Moon Knight and Dracula meet up, please.
Are you crying?
A bit.
Okay, this one is only for sentimental reasons. I want to see the Scorpion in live action. I say that because I feel like we got a bit robbed. Spider-Man Homecoming teased a Scorpion transformation with Matt Gargan teaming up with Adrian Toomes, but you can tell that plans changed.
Yeah, just roll it back to last Friday.
But that idea was disproven thanks to the Sonyverse, which stole Toomes from our timeline and placed him in a whole other universe with a dumb explanation. So now, where does that leave Scorpion? There's still a chance he shows up in Tom Holland's Spider-Man 4, but I'm not really holding my breath. I love Mangog's backstory and totally think he could fit with a new Thor movie. In the comics, Mangog is the physical manifestation of the hatred of a billion beings that were slaughtered by Odin back when he was a tyrant. I think that's cool. Imagine all of our collective hate for Star-Lord in the moment where he punches Thanos in the face while they're trying to get the Infinity Gauntlet off of him, and then that hate turns him into a beast that runs wild. That's basically Mangog, and he still works in the MCU. The Thor movies have loved to explore the idea of Odin's past as a bad guy coming back to haunt Thor, and this would be another way to do that. He could even factor into Thor Love and Thunder. I mean, Gore the God Butcher hates gods. Mangog is the physical manifestation of hate. It's a match made in heaven. For the last entry, I wanted to talk about a villain that's powerful enough to unite a version of the Midnight Suns. And the best option for that is Lilith, aka the mother of all demons. We know that Lilith is traditionally known as the first wife of the biblical Adam, so you know she's been around the block a bit. Normally in the comics, she's an enemy to Ghost Rider, and if the Spirit of Vengeance ever gets another solo project, then Lilith should be the big bad demon he has to face. But what I would like to see is that since she's so powerful, Ghost Rider has to recruit people like Blade, the Black Knight, and Moon Knight together in order to stop her. Featuring a big bad demon villain that's as powerful as Lilith, but maybe not as famous as Mephisto, opens the door to a supernatural and demonic side of the MCU we haven't seen before. The MCU just keeps growing, and we've gotten some amazing new characters in recent years, but there are still some big ones missing. Characters like Ghost Rider, Sentry, and Miles Morales, among many others, all seem to be waiting in the wings, just itching for their chance to shine. But when will these heroes actually show up, and how could they fit into the MCU as we know it today? Well, that's what I'm here to discuss. So what are we waiting for? Let's get started right now. We're slowly getting to the point where every Marvel character who showed up in a non-MCU movie has made their transition over to the MCU, but there is still one notable exception. Nick Cage starred as Ghost Rider for 2 movies, and while no one would say those 2 films are their favorite superhero films ever, Ghost Rider is still an extremely popular character that fans really want to see in the MCU. And yes, I completely understand that the MCU did technically have Ghost Rider in the MCU in the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. TV show, but I think the MCU will continue to ignore everything that happened in that show and just say it took place in a different universe somewhere. I know, it's a shame, and Robbie Reyes deserved more of a spotlight, but that now allows the MCU to focus on Johnny Blaze. What's interesting is that when the She-Hulk trailer came out, fans were quick to notice a Johnny Blaze poster in the background, so it could be that the MCU is setting the stage for Ghost Rider to come riding in, flaming skull and all. I think the reason we haven't been able to have Ghost Rider in the MCU so far is because the tone just didn't work. Having a hero out there that could just stare into your eyes and inflict untold amounts of pain to you if you've sinned didn't quite work with the whole Earth's Mightiest Heroes vibe. But now it's grown to be okay. With Doctor Strange taking things in a slightly darker territory and heroes like Blade and Moon Knight running around, Ghost Rider can fit right in. The question becomes, where would he go? I think they should do a Midnight Suns type of situation and team up all these slightly darker characters. Seeing Ghost Rider on a team at first before spinning him off into his own series, I think would be a good way to differentiate him from what came before. When Kevin Feige announced Phase 5 and parts of Phase 6 at Comic-Con, it gave us a clearer picture of what everything was building toward. I know we're all stoked for both Kang and potentially Doctor Doom to kick butt in the upcoming Kang Dynasty and Secret Wars Avengers films, but now it's become even clearer that the other big cosmic baddie Galactus is going to be waiting for a while to cause chaos. And no Galactus probably means no Silver Surfer, which is the real bummer. I think Galactus is cool and all, but I think it's time for people to get to know how amazing Silver Surfer is as a character. He's definitely a fan favorite and has way more layers to him than just a guy riding around on a cosmic surfboard. So if we're not doing Galactus for another few years, could you work Silver Surfer into the story sooner? I was kind of hoping we'd see Silver Surfer in Thor Love and Thunder to help set up the cosmic side of the MCU more, but that didn't happen. Probably for the best now, in my opinion. We do know the Eternals are traveling to confront the Celestials and try to save Earth from being judged. Maybe that inevitable sequel would be the best launching point for the hero that was once known as Norrin Radd. Speaking of his real name, another alternative is to introduce him pre-Silver Surfer. Maybe we can visit his homeworld in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 or something, so we know that he's there and what fate eventually awaits for him. Sticking cosmic for a second, let's talk about Nova. The character has a major Green Lantern vibe to him as a normal human who encounters a dying alien, and that alien grants him amazing abilities to join the Nova Corps, which was an intergalactic space corps. Yeah, it's a little derivative, but Richard Rider is an interesting enough character where I think that's okay, and the MCU has a great setup in place to introduce him. In the comics, Xandar is destroyed, which is what sort of leads to Richard getting his Nova powers. And then through his abilities, he's able to restore Xandar and help with repopulation. So overall, the setup needs to be that Xandar is in trouble, and that's where we're at now in the MCU. Although we didn't see it, we know Thanos completely decimated the Nova Corps as he steals the Power Stone. And then it's not mentioned, but imagine that small number that survived had to turn around and turn to dust after Thanos wiped out half the universe. All that tragedy means the Nova Corps might be looking to rebuild, and that's where Richard Rider comes into play. If we're talking movies, then the best place for him would probably be the Marvels movie. Captain Marvel is super space-bound, but while she's trapped either switching bodies with Miss Marvel or some other Earth shenanigan, it would be cool for her to leave Nova in charge of the space side while she figures out what's going on Earth. What if the Sentry had already been a part of the MCU, but no one remembers it? Like, what if the original Avengers had 7 members and Tony Stark wasn't alone with Nebula in Infinity War? What if Sentry had been there the whole time, but it was wiped from everyone's brains? Okay, I know that's too wild of a stretch, but it's an aspect of the Sentry character I find fascinating. He was truly one of Earth's most beloved and strongest heroes, but when he was around, his darker alter ego, the Void, was also around, which was just as strong as him but evil, so it created a huge conundrum. Are you being a responsible hero if even though you're the best hero on the planet, you're also responsible for its biggest problem? That's something I always want to see in live action. In the comics, there was an arc where Doctor Strange and others made the world forget about him, but we can't do that anymore since that's just a No Way Home ripoff. Maybe what would be cool is if the upcoming Fantastic Four movie actually does take place in the 60s like some people want, and we find that the Sentry is an active superhero in that time, but has to do the memory wipe thing. So whenever the Fantastic Four are transported to modern day, they could seek out the Sentry and awaken him from his unassuming life. It could be fun, right? Plus, it's been said that the Sentry has the power of 1 million exploding suns. How cool is that? Alright, this one is kind of a cheat since I'm talking about all the X-Men instead of an individual, but come on, there are so many of those guys. This whole list could have been X-Men we're excited to see and not just Marvel heroes. But that does beg the question, which mutant hero are you most excited to see in the MCU? The safe bet is the new Wolverine, but I would say updated versions of Professor X, Cyclops, and Jean Grey would be a lot of fun to see as well. Now, just to imagine where they would fit next in the MCU. You know, it would have been really perfect if the mutants just existed in another universe, which would have raised the stakes of the upcoming multiverse saga, but then Miss Marvel seems to suggest that mutants will be popping up on our Earth very soon. Not what I wanted, but at least we're on the right track about seeing our favorite mutants in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Where would someone like Wolverine fit the best? Honestly, given his whole vibe, maybe it would be the Blade movie. Blade could be hunting something he thinks is a vampire, but then it turns out to just be a Wolverine living an isolated life away from everyone. The future of Miles Morales in the MCU is a little difficult to predict. They teased that he at least is part of the universe thanks to Spider-Man Homecoming, but then the following year, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse was released. That is arguably one of the best Spider-Man films ever, which threw his inclusion in the MCU into doubt. Then No Way Home seemed to tease that there was a black Spider-Man out there, which many took as a Miles Morales tease, and now here we are, waiting for Miles to show up. As much as I want to see Miles Morales soon and have him play a part in all these upcoming Avengers movies, I think the wiser choice would be to wait. Right now, Tom Holland's Spider-Man is still about 17 years old in the MCU. I would say let's have another trilogy of Spider-Man movies, so Spider-Man 4, 5, and 6, where 4 is the street-level aspect paired with the black Spider-Man suit, possibly paired with Daredevil. Spider-Man 5 would tease Miles Morales and perhaps even introduce him at the very end, and then Spider-Man 6 could could be Tom Holland's Peter training a teenage Miles Morales. That would allow Tom Holland to age up a bit in order to take on a mentor role, because as of now, having a 15-year-old Miles with a 17-year-old Peter just feels a little weird, right? And hey, if you're suffering from serious Miles Morales withdrawals, then you have the animated Spider-Verse movies. So I think it all works out. So it's not uncommon for companies like Marvel and DC to create characters that are clear parallels to established heroes. With that in mind, let me mention Hyperion. Hyperion is Marvel's Superman and possesses much of the same powers. He was the only survivor of a race of Eternals that lived on a dying world, and he was sent to Earth as a baby where he would learn all the values of society and go on to be one of the world's greatest heroes. I think it would be absolutely hilarious if the MCU gets a Hyperion project off the ground and into movies before DC can decide what the heck to do with their Superman character. There was a rumor that Henry Cavill would play Hyperion in Loki 2, which is complete nonsense and doesn't make a lick of sense, but the idea that Loki could encounter bizarro versions of the Justice League and see what it's like to meet a literal Superman would be pretty cool. The MCU already showcased a different version of Superman, with Icarus having much the same powers, but he's sitting on the surface of the sun at the moment melting, which means someone has to step up. Why couldn't it be Hyperion? Simon Williams is Wonder Man, and his backstory is fun enough where I think he needs to play a prominent part in the MCU. So Simon originally got caught embezzling from his company, expressed an interest in hating Tony Stark, and then the Masters of Evil noticed this and recruited him for their little club. Baron Zemo hit him with some comic book mumbo-jumbo science blast and gave him superpowers. Then after, he was sent to infiltrate the Avengers and lead them into a trap. Wonder Man realized he wasn't really a bad guy and then started to help the Avengers. I don't think we've seen a full-on villain who becomes a good guy in the MCU, right? Sure, there's Bucky, but he was brainwashed, so that doesn't count. Maybe Echo, depending on her upcoming series, but it doesn't really matter. Wonder Man deserves a spot to shine. Honestly, I wish he showed up in She-Hulk. His case of starting off evil but then growing a conscience would have been an interesting trial scene. Other than that, maybe he'll show up in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3? You see, Wonder Man was actually in Guardians Volume 2, played by Nathan Fillion, but all those scenes were cut from the film. Now, one of the reasons they were cut could be that the MCU has plans for Simon Williams down the line and didn't want to ruin his appearance with just a joke. I've always been open with how I'm not a fan of how they treated the Hulk in the MCU, and while She-Hulk does offer an interesting new side for the character, I do wish we could see Amadeus Cho sooner rather than later. Amadeus is one of the smartest minds on the planet. He has a special skill of problem solving that allows him to think about specific scenarios and know how everything is going to play out. He brings a new element to the Hulk character that before we didn't get to see. And as Mark Ruffalo gets a little tired of all the dots on his face from motion capture, we could introduce a potentially smarter Amadeus Cho. So if I were running things, I'd make season 1 of She-Hulk end with a tease for season 2 that promises Amadeus in the mix. 1 Hulk is easy, 2 Hulks are an inconvenience. 3 Hulks just sounds fascinating, doesn't it? But yeah, given that he's super smart and super strong, makes him invaluable. If there's one cosmic Thor character that people want to see show up in the MCU, it's Beta Ray Bill. The Corbinite is a fan favorite character, and given that the MCU has changed things where Stormbreaker is a Thor weapon now that was used to kill Thanos, it makes you wonder how the MCU would incorporate the character right now. Most logically, he'd show up in the inevitable Thor 5 and join Thor on his adventures. But if I had a time machine, I would have changed things to replace Korg with Beta Ray Bill instead. We saw Beta Ray Bill as one of the champion Stoneheads in Ragnarok, so wouldn't it have made more sense if it was Bill who met Thor instead of Korg? Yeah, Korg was really funny in Ragnarok, but I personally thought it was too much Korg in Love and Thunder. If this was Beta Ray Bill instead, then we could have had Ragnarok be his introduction, and then gotten a more fleshed out version in Love and Thunder, which would have been awesome to see. I mean, however they bring in Beta Ray Bill will be fine with me, but now I can't help but despise Korg a little bit more, since I really think this idea could have worked wonderfully. There's an alternate universe out there where that axed New Warriors TV pilot was a huge success and Squirrel Girl was officially part of the MCU. Squirrel Girl has a big squirrel tail and has enhanced strength, speed, agility, and reflexes, along with some squirrel claws. Yeah, it sounds silly at first, but it's no different than the name Spider-Man, right? Anyways, Squirrel Girl is a really fun hero that deserves a place in the MCU. She's probably not movie material yet, but TV seems perfect for her. Logically, her humor falls in line with the She-Hulk TV show, so that would be the best bet of where she could show up. But how about a curveball and have Squirrel Girl show up in Daredevil's TV show? The Man Without Fear has 18 episodes to fill. Why not use fun characters like this? Hulkling is another hero whose story deserves to be told for how epic it is. Hulkling is the son of a Kree and Skrull, which makes him insanely important in the cosmic war that has always been brewing between these two races. He's inherited abilities from both parents, which means he can shapeshift like the Skrull, but also has all the abilities like flight, super speed, and strength of his Kree side. It's truly the best of both worlds. As the Kree and Skrull war are set to do battle and secret invasion probably, that would be the perfect time to introduce a young Hulkling so that he could join the Young Avengers down the line. Because Disney likes to reuse plots that work, maybe they'll have Nick Fury tasked with protecting a young Hulkling just for funsies. The MCU is slowly starting to incorporate Nexus beings as it begins its multiversal war, which means it should probably bring in the Nexus of all realities, right? And you know who protects that? That's right, Man-Thing. Man-Thing might look a little freaky, but his heart is in the right place. At least, I think it is. Dr. Ted Sallis was working on another super soldier serum, injected it within himself, then accidentally crashed his car into a magical swamp, and that eventually turned him into Man-Thing. I'm just saying, since Nexus beings are going to be important, it feels like Kang would attack the Nexus of all realities, wouldn't he? That makes Man-Thing an incredibly important hero in the grand scheme of things. Plus, I just think Man-Thing is neat. More Man-Thing, please. Heroes are great and all, but come on, what really turns an MCU movie from good to great is a fantastic villain at its center. And although the MCU has been going for over a decade now, there's still a ton of villains the franchise needs to introduce. All these bad guys on today's list could cause serious trouble for Earth's mightiest heroes and completely change everything, don't you think?
Oh boy.
I mean, when will we see Magneto?
My brothers.
Will Thunderbolt Ross ever become Red Hulk?
Don't worry about me.
Is Moreland the next big Spidey villain? Let's get into it right now.
Whoa.
I think out of any villain yet to be introduced, the biggest one, almost literally, that fans want has to be Galactus. The giant purple planet eater is a major threat in the comics, and honestly, it's a little weird we haven't heard any mention of him so far. Like, he's definitely out there, right? Maybe the MCU is trying to figure out how exactly to fit the giant cosmic entity into their overall story, because the simple explanation would be to just make him a celestial. They did that with Ego, the living planet after all, but huge Galactus fans, or Galactheads as I like to call ourselves, know that he's actually a remnant of the previous universe that carried over, so he's technically even older and more powerful than the Celestials. Maybe the MCU will have him be the big threat to the Celestials, and Earth helping stop him will convince the Celestials to not crack us open like an egg. One of the most important non-cosmic villains that need to show up in the MCU is Doctor Doom. And yes, I mean actually Doctor Doom. The previous Fox versions of the character made the baffling decision to not adapt the character properly, not just once, but twice. Like, is it so hard to have a supreme leader of Latveria be a big threat to our heroes? But to be fair, both of the previous versions had the difficult task of providing an origin story for the Fantastic Four, and there wasn't time to introduce a Victor Von Doom that wasn't tied directly to Marvel's first family. But the MCU is a massive place now. You could easily introduce Doctor Doom in something like Black Panther 2 and have Latveria battle Atlantis and Wakanda in a power struggle, and then have the Fantastic Four fight him in their own movie. That would work, right? Just please, MCU, get him right this time.
Trespassing on Latverian soil.
Honestly, I didn't care that much about Mephisto until WandaVision.
Where is he?
And then, when Marvel's Devil didn't actually show up after weeks of hints and constant online speculating, I was majorly disappointed.
Boner.
And at this point, the MCU's just teasing us, right? Like when the No Way Home trailer first came out, there was that huge shot of a poster saying Peter was the devil in disguise, which was a reference to how this specific comic storyline originally featured Mephisto as the one that erased everyone's memory. I mean, people even thought that Doctor Strange was actually Mephisto in disguise, but the devil still hasn't made an appearance. Where's he at? After all the fan theories, he has to face Wanda at some point, right? With Adam Warlock officially entering the MCU in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, we're all left wondering just what type of character he's going to be. In the comics, Adam's greatest comic arc is tied with the Infinity Gauntlet and Thanos, but he wasn't around yet in the MCU to be a big player in Infinity War or Endgame. So what happens now? Well, in the comics, Adam Warlock has an evil side thanks to a split personality known as Magus, who's incredibly dangerous. I sense a strong thematic parallel between the Guardians trying to befriend Adam while fighting the evil version of him, while also trying to find a different version of Gamora to bring her back on the team. I think it makes sense.
Gamora.
As much as we all want the mutants and the X-Men to be introduced in the MCU, that also means all the mutants' villains will also be free to roam around and cause havoc. That's a scary thought because a lot of them are just devastating. Take Onslaught, for instance. Onslaught is an Avengers movie type of threat. His story has been switched up a few times, but his big one is that he's the sentient psionic entity created from the consciousness of Charles Xavier and Magneto. The amount of damage this villain can do should terrify any hero, and maybe the creation of Onslaught down the line will be the catalyst for the X-Men and the Avengers to team up? Maybe. So Galactus and Doctor Doom are big Fantastic Four villains, but they're not first movie villains, you know what I mean? We know a Fantastic Four movie is coming, so who's a big enough threat for Marvel's first family to face? Why not Annihilus? The baddie is the ruler of the Negative Zone, which in the Ultimate Comic universe is what gave the Fantastic Four their powers. So a movie with the Negative Zone at its center would be perfect for Annihilus.
A spot in this wretched universe.
He's your classic, let's take over everything so I can live longer type of villain, and he even comes with his own MacGuffin in the Cosmic Control Rod. If I was a betting man, I'd bet Annihilus will face the Fantastic Four sooner rather than later in the MCU. What would Magneto be like in the MCU? You really can't have mutants and the X-Men without the Master of Metal, but also you have to follow in the footsteps of two near-perfect performances. As wonky as the Fox X-Men movies could get, both Ian McKellen and Michael Fassbender brought gravitas, charm, and tragedy to their portrayals of Magneto, where anyone else has huge shoes to fill. Plus, how do you bring in Magneto in today's MCU? The core of Magneto's character has always been how he's a Holocaust survivor. But now that it's like the 2020s in the MCU, that age issue means a big change might have to happen, right? Unless, of course, they make it where it's the 1980s or 90s in whatever universe the X-Men come from? That sounds fun. The Hulk's rage-fueled personality has been seriously neutered in the MCU lately, and honestly, it's just not as fun. I want the angry Hulk to smash things again. That's why bringing in a character like Maestro would be the shot in the arm the character needs right now. Maestro is an alternate future version of the Hulk who rules over the apocalyptic wasteland that once was Earth, and thanks to a nuclear war, the villain is even stronger and more intelligent than normal Hulk. I think the next big Avengers movie should be an adaptation of Secret Wars, which means bringing in the Beyonder to the MCU. The Beyonder is one of the most powerful beings in the entire universe and has always been fascinated with humanity and their beliefs about reality. That's the setup for Secret Wars, which sees the uber-powerful being transport a lot of heroes and villains to a place called Battle World so they could fight it out for the Beyonder's enjoyment. So there's a relatively new villain in Marvel Comics, but it's actually a familiar hero. Let me explain. There's a version of Gamora out there who eliminated Thanos herself and set off on her own quest to get the Infinity Stones, taking on the mantle known as Requiem. This villain version of the character could technically be adapted into the MCU with the upcoming Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Maybe 2014 Gamora has spent her time on her own doing assassin-like things with the Requiem moniker, and it's up to the Guardians to bring her back to the side of good. Well, to the side of kinda good, right? What if there was a villain with all of the Fantastic Four's powers? Well, you're in luck. There is one. Super Skrull is a Skrull warrior created by the Skrull Empire because they were pretty angry at the Fantastic Four for thwarting one of their invasion plans. And so their solution was to create a fighter that could do everything the Fantastic Four could do, except better. I really like the idea of the Fantastic Four facing one villain with all their powers because it would highlight that sometimes teamwork and strategy is better than just being on your own. So bring on Super Skrull. Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross has been in the MCU since basically the beginning now, and yet we still haven't seen him transform into Red Hulk. What gives? Come on, if they're bringing Abomination back for a sizable Phase 4 arc, then the least they could do is give us some Red Hulk action. I want the Hulk to face one last great threat in the MCU, and seeing him trade blows with Red Hulk would be a fight more than a decade in the making. You know, a few years ago when we were in the middle of like Phase 2 of the MCU, the giant floating head villain known as MODOK might have seemed a little far-fetched. But now,
Hands out!
give me more MODOK. There's no reason why MODOK wouldn't work in the MCU now, with his big head and little arms causing all sorts of mayhem and mischief in the MCU. And in fact, if rumors are to be believed, he's on his way. Lately, there's been reports of MODOK appearing in Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, but the rumors are all over the place. Some people say that Corey Stoll's Darren Cross will return as the MCU's version of MODOK, who was disfigured thanks to the Quantum Realm, and others are saying none other than Jim Carrey will be playing the character in the third movie.
Time to change the world.
Look, the Fox X-Men movies are really hit and miss, and unfortunately, X-Men Apocalypse was a big miss. They ruined one of Marvel's best evil mutants, and hopefully the MCU can bring a better version of Apocalypse to the big screen. Alright, I just want to keep the mutant train going for a second. Mr. Sinister, just a great name by the way, had a lot of references in the Fox X-Men movies, but that now will never pay off. So it's time to bring Nathaniel Essex into the MCU. Thanks to genetic engineering, Essex became an ageless, chalky white, vampire-esque character obsessed with creating a perfect species of superhumans. Of course, genetic engineering makes him a prime villain for the mutants and the X-Men, and it's a villain that would work well in the MCU. Yeah, ever since No Way Home, I've just been thinking about ways that we can reunite the three Spider-Men again. And that's where Morlun comes into play. Morlun was the main villain in the comic Spider-Verse storyline, where the vampiric being traveled across the multiverse, devouring every Spider-Man and Peter Parker he could get his hands on. If the MCU wanted to make a faithful live-action Spider-Verse film, then Morlun is the villain to make it happen. Cyclops is a character who never got the spotlight he deserved in the X-Men films. Making him the third wheel to the Wolverine and Jean Grey love story really set the character back, and while Wolverine became the face of the franchise in live action, comic readers know Cyclops is a much bigger deal than the movies made him out to be. Which is why when the X-Men are brought into the MCU, that Scott Summers should be the new center of the group, not Wolverine. You can do this by forming most stories around Scott, like the introduction of Vulcan, Scott's other brother who's an Omega-level mutant that can control vast amounts of energy. Yeah, he could be bad news and a worthy adversary for the X-Men in a way that puts Scott Summers front and center. With Daredevil and Kingpin back in the MCU, it's only a matter of time before we see other Daredevil allies and villains pop up. The one I'm most excited for is Bullseye. One of Daredevil's best villains, the guy who can hit anything with just about anything, can challenge Daredevil in unique and interesting ways. But the big question is, do you bring in the version of the character who just had an origin story in the Daredevil TV show, or do you reboot the character for the MCU? That's actually a really tough question because both options are plausible and could work. Alright, this one technically might break the rules because Leader did appear in the MCU, but just not on screen. Samuel Stearns had a head wound that got infected with Hulk blood in The Incredible Hulk, which was a tease for the character to become the villain known as the Leader in a later movie. Of course, that didn't happen, but a tie-in comic centered around Black Widow shows that right after Stearns is infected, he wakes up to find his intelligence amplified to extreme levels. Natasha then swoops in and promptly arrests him. Even though he started off as just a regular dude named Herbert Windham, the crazed scientist was given a way to unlock genetic code and kept upgrading himself with power and armor, where he soon became one of the smartest and most powerful villains in the universe, known as the High Evolutionary. Thanks to his evolutionary accelerator machine, this villain was able to accelerate his personal evolution, making him at times close to all-powerful. Thor's new journey, where he basically wants to travel around and have space adventures to reignite his passion for life, means he's going to come across some wild characters and villains. That's where Amatsu Mikaboshi, aka the Chaos King, comes into play. The Chaos King is the god of evil and chaos, if you couldn't guess, and is honestly downright terrifying in appearance. This would be a new type of villain for Thor to face, and I would love this new comical version of Thor to go up against such a demented evil in one of his solo movies, wouldn't you? Let's stick to Thor villains for a second. So Thor is the Asgardian god of thunder, and I've long held the belief that future Thor movies should see Thor interact with other gods in the universe. So yes, that means the MCU should introduce Thor to the Greek gods, which includes the god of war Ares. Yes, Ares has already been the main villain of the Wonder Woman film, so chances of seeing him in the MCU are slim, but I think there's a way to introduce Ares and the other Greek gods in a way that stands apart from what the DCEU has done. Okay, one last Thor villain, I promise. Mangog is the physical manifestation of the hatred of a billion beings from a race that was slaughtered by Odin long ago. In the comics, this beast is imprisoned in Asgard, and since the MCU has now reduced Asgard to space dust, maybe a part of Thor 4 could center around Thor gathering up the creatures that have now escaped out into the cosmos. That would be a fun way to continue Thor's new character arc, with him establishing a new legacy of cleaning up Asgard's past misdeeds. With the Armor Wars series coming up, it's the perfect time to introduce Crimson Dynamo, basically the Russian Iron Man. Introducing Crimson Dynamo to Armor Wars means you could probably include Red Guardian somehow, which is a great idea because the fan favorite character doesn't have a return set yet after his scene-stealing turn in Black Widow. Okay, this last one I just picked for the name, Tiger Shark. Come on, he's a giant shark humanoid creature that's basically the MCU's version of King Shark from DC Comics. He's naturally an enemy of Namor, and with the Submariner playing a role in Black Panther 2, I'm holding out hope for an appearance of Tiger Shark. You can never have enough giant shark humanoid creatures in your life, don't you think?
So he's gone.
The MCU keeps expanding, and while I don't see things slowing down anytime soon when it comes to character introduction,
no more slingshots, no more destruction. We need to clean this mess up and go home.
I'm also very curious about the heroes and villains that we won't see. I mean, some characters are too weird, too problematic, or just don't fit within the MCU and the stories it wants to tell. So today's video is all about those guys that we'll probably never see in live action.
You're in the right place. Thank you for that.
Bummer. I'm talking Red Hulk, Mephisto, Sentry, Squirrel Girl, and a whole lot more. Let's get started right now.
They lived happily ever after. Wait, what?
Alright, there will be a few Hulk-centric characters on this list because I just don't think we'll see a lot of Hulk focus going forward. The prime Hulk years have seen the character reduced to a side character thanks to rights issues. And even though She-Hulk seems to be setting up a Planet Hulk-esque storyline with possibly Hulk's son involved, I just don't see the MCU focusing on a lot of Hulk stories in the coming years. Which is a real shame because we're missing out on some wonderful characters, like Maestro. I've always felt Maestro was the solution to the MCU's Hulk problem. In the comics, there was often a sense that Hulk was this uncontrollable monster who could snap at any moment. But after the first Avengers movie, that idea that Hulk could go berserk has kind of gone out the window. Now he's all goofy and we're not even sure if the Hulk personality is coming back. So I thought Maestro could have been a way to introduce the rampaging, dangerous version of Hulk without it causing serious damage to our Hulk Hulk's reputation. In the comics, Maestro is an alternate version of Hulk from the future who has survived a nuclear holocaust and came out of it even stronger. He also possesses Banner's intellect, so he's the best of both worlds. Especially with the multiverse, I thought we could visit a universe where Maestro reigns supreme, forcing Smart Hulk to either tap into his Hulk personality once again, or serve as a cautionary tale of what he might become. I also thought it would be cool if Kang recruited evil versions of all the Avengers from different universes and Maestro was one of them. See, some fun options, but since we're entering more into the era of She-Hulk than regular Hulk, I don't see them going this route. I mean, Mark Ruffalo probably doesn't want to do this forever, right? Or does he? I never know with that guy. Sentry is the superhero name for Robert Reynolds, and he's one of the strongest heroes in the Marvel Universe. But there's something really interesting about him. As long as he's around, the evil darkness, the Void, who's just as strong as he is also around, creating a struggle where he's a fantastic hero, but also the cause for a lot of suffering. Overall, he's a really cool character, and he's one of the biggest exclusions from the MCU. But at this stage, is it too late to introduce him? I think it might be, and there are some reasons for that. The first is his backstory. The way Robert Reynolds gets his powers is that he's a meth addict who breaks into a lab and takes the Golden Sentry Serum, which is an offshoot of the Super Soldier Serum that made Captain America. So there's a lot of red flags right there. First of all, I don't think the MCU will ever have a meth addict as a backstory for one of their heroes. If they sidestepped Tony Stark's alcoholism, then there's no way they're touching Sentry's original backstory. On top of that, at this stage, can you really tell an interesting Super Soldier Serum gone wrong storyline? Haven't we mined that enough in Falcon and the Winter Soldier? So keeping both of those elements in mind, I don't think they can bring the Sentry to life without drastically changing his backstory. And even if they do that, would we really want to see a version of Superman in the MCU? I mean, we kind of already did with Icarus, and the MCU got rid of him pretty quickly. You think they would introduce another character with his almost exact skill set so soon? Sorry, Sentry, much like your backstory, I think the MCU has forgotten about you permanently. Another Hulk character, but this one has a much sadder reason why we probably won't see him. Red Hulk is one of Hulk's greatest villains. Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross has been a long-time enemy of Bruce Banner and his alter ego, and Ross's obsession eventually led him to becoming a Hulk himself. Thunderbolt Ross was one of the earliest MCU characters who kept popping up in later movies, and what they were doing with him was interesting and seemed to suggest they had bigger plans for him. They de-aged the character for Black Widow, which, yeah, could have just been a simple explanation of them having him look like he did in Civil War, but also, he didn't look that much different, right? Like, would anyone have cared if he looked just a little older in Black Widow than he did in Endgame? Sure, maybe my memory is foggy and he looked drastically older, but my crazy theory is that they de-aged William Hurt as practice for when they could turn him into Red Hulk down the line. But of course, tragedy happened when Hurt passed away recently. And yes, the MCU could recast the character, but he's also not a vital MCU character where they need to do that. They could easily have the character pass away in the MCU to match real life, and then we never get Red Hulk. That's understandable, but a little disappointing. The only glimmer of hope that we might get this character is the upcoming Thunderbolts movie. Here's my thing about that. Why call it Thunderbolts? None of the characters they've officially announced, meaning Yelena, Red Guardian, Bucky Barnes, US Agent, Ghost, Taskmaster, and Valentina Allegra de Fontaine, are traditionally on the Thunderbolts team. And in the real world, wouldn't your movie be more marketable if you called it the Dark Avengers? So the Thunderbolts has to be an important name for a reason. And in the comics, one iteration of the team is called that because of Thunderbolt Ross, who both leads and serves on the team as Red Hulk. So what do you think? Should they recast Thunderbolt Ross in the MCU to give us Red Hulk? Or is it more respectful to just retire the character permanently? Alright, at this stage, it would be sort of hilarious and the ultimate troll move if the MCU never introduces Mephisto, right? I mean, how can they at this point? Expectations were set so high at the start of Phase 4, with everyone thinking he was going to show up in WandaVision, then people thinking he could show up in Loki, then the Spider-Man No Way Home film not only having a plot that in the comics featured Mephisto, but it also had a trailer that had a huge hint to Mephisto to the point that people were speculating that Doctor Strange was Mephisto Mephisto in disguise. So after all that, I wonder if the MCU has backed themselves into a corner a bit with the character. Any introduction now may not live up to the hype set by the start of Phase 4. The MCU might just want to always tease the character, but never introduce him, just to continue stoking the fires. I mean, is there a good place for him to show up? Anything with Doctor Strange would be a safe bet, but the former Sorcerer Supreme's next movie seems to be centered around Clea and a trip back to the Dark Dimension. So does that leave room for Marvel's Devil? I don't know. Alright, this one is a bit of a cheat, but also different enough where I don't mind putting them on this list. In the Secret Empire storyline, it was revealed that Captain America was Hydra all along. Well, not really. The Tesseract had rewritten reality to turn Steve Rogers evil, and it created a really compelling villain in Hydra Captain America. Now, with Chris Evans hanging up his shield and old Steve Rogers on the moon or something for the rest of his life, we'll never get the Secret Empire arc, and that's a real shame. An evil Steve Rogers might be a great villain for Sam Wilson to fight in a future movie, but there doesn't seem a way to do that now that Chris Evans has moved on from the role. And let's be honest, Chris Evans would kill it as evil Captain America. Yes, in the MCU, Evans was great embodying a morally upstanding hero, but since his time as a hero, it seems like Evans has relished in playing sinister characters. So this wouldn't have been outside the realm of possibility. So here's a question in line with my Red Hulk question. Do you think it's worth having an evil Steve Rogers from a different universe if it's not Chris Evans playing him? I don't know. Remember when we were in the theater for No Way Home and the post-credit scene was a teaser for Multiverse of Madness, which seemed to confirm Shuma Gorath and we were all excited? But then remember when they gave us a character that looked exactly like Shuma Gorath, but couldn't call him that because Marvel doesn't own the rights to the name? Yeah, I think that means we'll never get to Shuma Gorath in the MCU, especially since they gave us a vague version of the character in What If, but also didn't call him by his name. Couple that with the Multiverse of Madness monster, and that means that even if Marvel did acquire the rights to the name later on, they already spoiled the design on something else. So although Shuma Gorath is an all-powerful, multiversal being that rivals any huge Marvel threat, he probably will never make the jump to live action properly. What's bittersweet about Squirrel Girl is that we almost had her in the MCU. Before Disney Plus became the exclusive home to all new Marvel shows, the MCU was branching out and trying all different types of Marvel shows on different streaming services like Hulu. Hulu had a new Warriors project in development that never moved past the pilot phase, but it did star Mulana Weintraub of AT&T commercial fame as Squirrel Girl, which feels like perfect casting. But since that project was scrapped, it's hard to imagine if there's a place for Squirrel Girl in the MCU. It's not like she fits in Moon Knight or Eternals or anything, right? The only place that would be fitting for her would probably be She-Hulk, but I think now that's a long shot. And that's unfortunate because Squirrel Girl opens up a much quirkier side of the MCU, and now I don't think we're seeing that. Yeah, I've given up on Beta Ray Bill at this point. I think the time to introduce the Corbinite has long passed. They've already altered the story of his Stormbreaker weapon, and they went through the whole someone else's worthy of Mjolnir arc with Jane in Love and Thunder. You know what? I really think Korg's character should have been replaced with Beta Ray Bill. We got the hint that Beta Ray Bill was a gladiator on Sakaar in Ragnarok, so that would have made sense. And the overexposure of Korg in Love and Thunder convinced me that the movie would have been better if Beta Ray Bill filled that spot instead. But now? I don't know. Yes, it said in the end credits title cards that Thor will return, but will he get another solo movie? Reception of Love and Thunder wasn't stellar like Ragnarok, so it's unclear if Taika Waititi would be back for another one. And with Avengers The Kang Dynasty and Avengers Secret Wars being big enough films that could serve as the logical endpoint for Thor's character, it makes you wonder if Beta Ray Bill will show up at all. Okay, one more Hulk character, and I'll keep this one short and sweet. In the comics, Amadeus Cho is the 7th smartest man on Earth, and he does become the Hulk after Bruce Banner. And while that's great in the comics, is there really room for him in the MCU? Think about it, we just got She-Hulk in the MCU, so I imagine it's going to take a while before they give us another Hulk in order to give She-Hulk time to breathe and grow a bit. And we're about to get the introduction of 2 of the smartest minds on the planet with Reed Richards and Doctor Doom. So there's not really a place for another super smart guy known for being smart, right? It would be weird if they introduced Reed Richards as this incredibly smart dude who's miles smarter than anyone else, but then immediately introduce another hero who's also a genius. At least, that's my thinking. Alright, let's get weird for 1 second. Did you know that Doc Savage is one of the forerunners for modern superheroes? It's true. Stan Lee himself credited the 1930s hero as the foundation for future superheroes. It's also kind of funny that his Wikipedia page starts off with the sentence, Doc Savage is a fictional character of the competent man hero type. Yep, I would definitely call him competent, and he does have a history of being published by Marvel Comics, so it counts. But although he is such an important figure in comics, he'll never be in the MCU. There's just no way to make that work. And yes, it's not really a huge loss since he's only minimally connected to Marvel Comics, but still the MCU is choosing to explore the past a bit more recently, and seeing another movie set in the 1930s or 40s in Steve Rogers' old time period would be a lot of fun. It won't happen, but it would be fun. The fact that the MCU altered Thanos' backstory and motivation to pivot him away from being in love with death was probably the smarter move, but it does mean we now miss out on death as a character. And I think there's an alternate universe out there where the MCU used the Asgardian goddess of death Hela as a death stand-in and made Thanos in love with her. That would have added an entirely new spin to the MCU. But given that they amped up the death aspect of Hela's character in Ragnarok and changed Thanos' main goals, I think that means we'll never see death in the MCU. I mean, yeah, we'll see characters die and we'll see death, but not the character of death. You know what I mean. So The Marvels is a movie that's coming out soon, and it focuses on Captain Marvel, Miss Marvel, and Spectrum, who was Captain Marvel before becoming Spectrum in the comics. That's a lot of Marvels, and it makes me think because of that, we'll never see Blue Marvel in the MCU. Blue Marvel is one of those incredibly strong heroes that you just don't hear about enough. He's not only strong enough to lift 100 tons with ease, but can also produce stable antimatter, one of the most powerful substances, or whatever you want to call antimatter, in the universe. Given that in the comics his backstory is related to the Negative Zone, which I think would be reserved for the Fantastic Four in the MCU, and that he has a similar story to Isaiah Bradley from Falcon and the Winter Soldier, I just don't think we're going to get this character in this franchise. Because of the relationship with DC Comics, I don't think we're getting any Superman-esque characters in the MCU. Again, like I mentioned before, they already had Icarus and they got rid of him quickly, which makes me think we'll avoid Superman-inspired characters in the MCU going forward, and that means no Hyperion. Hyperion is clearly a Superman homage, coming from a universe where he was the sole survivor of a race of Eternals, sent to Earth as a baby, and was raised by a kind family who instilled in him truth, justice, and all that jazz. Yeah, too close to Superman that I don't think the MCU will bother with Hyperion. Daredevil is back, and we know he's going to be facing Kingpin, but there have to be other villains in the 18-episode series, right? So just who would that consist of? I can tell you right now that he's not going to be fighting Stiltman. Yeah, Daredevil does have a villain who can extend his legs to insane heights to commit crime. I mean, the Netflix shows were super dark and gritty, so there's no way the character would fit there, but I would also guess good money that Stiltman is also too goofy for the reboot show, even if it is on Disney+. Okay, last but not least, we're certainly not going to get any DC characters in the MCU. Comics have a long history of insane crossovers, leading to things like Superman holding Captain America's shield and wielding Mjolnir. Yeah, as cool as it would be to one day get a project of DC characters interacting with Marvel characters, that just won't happen on the big screen. Sure, the actors can jump franchises though, like Michael Keaton can be Batman and also play the Vulture, but those characters will never get the chance to meet each other. Probably for the best. But one last question. Do you think if DC ever gets their cinematic universe expanded that it could lead to an epic DC versus MCU crossover in like 20 years? At that point, who would win? You know, if it wasn't for the Werewolf by Night trailer, I totally would have said Man-Thing as a character we'd probably never see in the MCU. But nope, there he is in all his Man-Thing glory. What characters on this list do you think have the chance to pop up? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching CBR.